Have you ever wanted to overthrow the government using dinosaurs? Well, now you can! Unfortunately, I am probably now on a list for making this game, but let me show you how I made it. It all started a couple weeks ago when it was nearing the end of my school year. I was starting to have less homework and more free time, and I was itching to get to developing a new game, so I decided to join my first ever online game jam. Okay, well that's technically a lie, because back during the pandemic, before I even began developing games on GameMaker, I did my first ever game jam on Scratch. The theme ended up being monochromatic, so I spent a week brainstorming and developing my game, and ended up just making a clone of Splatoon. I did actually win that game jam, but there was only one other participant, and they made this.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell, man. What the fuck, man?
And the game of the year is...
Red Cave, a platformer.
Anyways, now you hopefully understand why I wouldn't exactly count that, although it was a nice first experience for a game jam. Back to Fossils vs Feds though. After looking over some of the ongoing game jams on itch, I found a really cool one called the Pixel Game Jam. Its whole shtick was that every game had to be made with pixel art, and I've only ever made pixel art games with GameMaker anyway, so it was perfect. I signed up, and soon the theme was announced to be From the Dead. The competition would take place from May 11th to May 20th, and like I said, since it was nearing the end of my school year, I thought I would have plenty of time to work on my game. What I didn't realize though, was that it seems like all of my teachers decided to give me a break the week I signed up for the jam, only to bombard me with final projects the week of it. I had my final projects for English, History, Physics, and final exam for Pre-Calculus, all due before the game jam submission date. So I did what I had to do and locked in during school for once. I would work on all of my projects during whatever free time I had at school, and when I got home, I would work on my game jam submission until going to bed. I also had one less extra day to work on my game because it was due Tuesday morning while I was at school, meaning I had to submit my game by Monday night. It was a lot of work, but in the end, I got it done, and I'm very proud of the game I ended up making, even if there are some things I wish I could have added. Anyways, I'll get to all of that at the end of the video. Kicking off the start of the game jam, I took an entire day just to think about the concept of my game, and while most people ended up making games about bringing back zombies or something else to do with spirits or monsters becoming alive, I never wanted to make a game to do with any of those concepts. My first thought actually was to make a game about dinosaurs coming back to life, because dinosaurs are awesome. And surprisingly, I didn't see any other person make their game about extinct creatures coming back from the dead. At first, I wanted to make some sort of endless game, where you play as a dinosaur trying to eat as many people as possible, upgrading your dinosaur after every run and whatnot. But eventually, I came to the conclusion that, at least in my opinion, the best game jam games are the ones that have a lot of depth, while not being endless. I've always found my favorite game jam entries to be the ones where there are a limited number of levels that showcase the game's design well, but could still be completed in a short period of time with a satisfying ending. So in the end, I was inspired by Totally Accurate Battle Simulator.
It's called Tabs. Totally amazing, but simulator. Yes.
And decided to make a strategy game where you play as an intern to a crazy scientist named Dr. Evol who brings back the dinosaurs. The problem is, the government isn't too keen about Dr. Evol doing this under zero regulation, but she interprets this as the government trying to steal her research for themselves. So she ends up making you, the intern, fight back against the feds using the creatures she brings back. With my premise for the game set, I began coding the system that allowed you to place down units. I know I wanted the first unit to be dodo birds since they're small and weak, which you might know if you've played Ark like I have. They're also the cheapest unit in the game, and not gonna lie, it's pretty funny to spam them. It didn't take long for me to make a simple AI for the units that made them walk towards cops and attack them until they were defeated, but there were still some issues with the dodos. First of all, the game crashed when the dodo birds no longer had a cop to target, but this was an easy fix. I'm mainly talking about the dodo birds squeezing into a single position. At first, I didn't know how to go about fixing this, but then I realized it's 2025 and I can just go on Reddit and steal, borrow some code. And holy flip, it actually works. I was not expecting that.
Bruh.
You may also notice that I gave the player the ability to drag around the screen because I didn't want to be limited with the size of my levels. The code for that took me a hot minute to figure out, but I ended up being able to just borrow some more code, and that also worked. After that, I began working on the art for the UI, but that's when my sister said that she could help draw the characters for the game, which ended up being a great help. It was her first time ever doing pixel art, but I love how it ended up coming out. Anyways, I began developing the other essential features of the game, like enemy territory that you couldn't place units on, and a selection system where you could override the control over where units went during battle, and they'll become highlighted and start following your mouse. This ended up not being too useful in the final game, but I still think it's a pretty cool feature. I had a hard time at first making the white outline for the sprites, since it would require a shader, and I don't know how to write shaders. But then I realized it's 2025 and I can just go on Reddit and steal... Oh, it doesn't work.
Bruh.
Yeah, I couldn't find a single shader that worked anywhere somehow, so I ended up just thugging it out and made my own script to do it, which didn't even use a shader, but at least it worked. And I also made the game way prettier by using yet another Kenny pack, this time for a city tile set. And while the art styles did end up clashing a little bit, time was getting tight and, well, it was right there. But I promise that's the last time I used pre-made assets for this game. The last major gameplay feature I needed was the AI for the feds, which took a bit, but I ended up making a system where they walk around in a random direction near your targets, and then attack when they get close. And with some of the new art my sister made now implemented, the game was finally starting to look more complete. Hooray! Until I remembered about the boring stuff. Menus and cutscenes. Now I don't mean that they're boring features. When done right, they can be some of the best parts of a game. But I meant they're boring and tedious to make. Now, usually game jam entries tend to skimp out on polishing the main menu and stuff like cutscenes, but I made sure to get mine looking smooth. The main menu is very simple, but it got the job done, and I enjoyed making the art for the buttons and the mural of fossils in the background. I also used a sequence to make the room transition animation, which I think came out pretty good. Now, when it came to the cutscenes, I luckily had a text engine that I had already programmed over 2 years ago, and since it's been so long since I made it, I cannot tell you how any of it works, but when I put it into my game, it functioned perfectly, and that's all that matters. I'm glad I spent the time to do all this, because I think the beginning and ending cutscenes, along with the text boxes at the beginning of each level, really add a lot of charm and personality to the game, and is way better than just stuffing the entire story into the description on the itch.io page. With the main gameplay formula done, I began working on finishing all of the units and enemies in the game, but at this point the jam was ending in only 2 days. Luckily, I had finished my schoolwork at this point, so I exported my game files to my laptop and was working on the game on Monday while at school. While I was at school, I made simple projectiles that were going to be needed by some enemies, and I coded a hitbox system that allowed any object in the game to do attacks with an area of effect. With all those essential building blocks done, I got home from school and started wrapping up the game. Now is probably a good time to tell you about the units I ended up deciding on adding. Obviously, you have the Dodo first, which is a weak, spammable unit that probably serves better as a distraction than anything else. The saber-toothed cat is next, and yes, I said cat, not tiger, because apparently they're not even tigers, and it's a huge misconception that they are. One of my focuses while making this game was making the prehistoric creatures more accurate than they have otherwise been portrayed in other forms of media, as stuff like Jurassic Park has really skewed the public's perception of dinosaurs. For example, we know now that many dinosaurs had feathers. After all, they are the ancestors to birds, so I made sure to include the feathers in my game. Anyways, the saber-tooth acts as a medium power unit, while the Utah Raptor after it is much faster and stronger, at the cost of being defeated kind of fast. After that, I included some more iconic prehistoric creatures. The mammoth serves as a high health tank and can hit dozens of feds at once, which makes it pretty much required to beat some levels, but it's pretty slow. And finally, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It can chomp on multiple feds at once like the mammoth, but has a smaller range, although it is much faster and stronger. On the other side, I only ended up making 4 enemy units, but I think that was enough because each one filled a certain niche. The basic cop does melee damage with its baton and can only hit 1 unit at a time, while the riot shielder can ram into lots of your units at once, rendering them immune to stuff like dodo bird spam. The other 2 enemies are ranged projectile users. The Secret Service agent shoots high damage lasers, but can easily be overwhelmed by fast units like raptors or dodo bird spam. And finally, the tank shoots rounds that explode on impact. dealing damage in a large area, just like a ranged version of the Riot Shielder. I also made the Secret Service Agent and Tank back away from your units instead of getting closer, making them a bit more difficult to deal with. With those 4 total enemies, hopefully you can see how each one fills a niche. At this point, I could feel the end of the game jam getting nearer, and all that was left was to add audio and design the levels. My sister had graciously made a music track for the game, which she then edited into a more bare-bone version to be used in scenes like the menu. For the sound effects, I would try to find public domain audio of things like cats, birds, and elephants, and then I would edit the audio to match the game. And for stuff like the menu sound effects, I used a sweet sound effect generator called ChipTone. With that, I spent the rest of my Monday evening just designing levels, which I naively thought would be easy, but it actually turned out being pretty hard, making unique and compelling puzzle levels, although I'm still pretty happy with a lot of the levels in the game, even if some are a little too hard or a little too easy. The level quality does seem to get slightly worse towards the end of the game, but to be fair, it was like 2 AM on a school night when I was making them, so give me a break. At around 3 AM, I finally submitted my game, and my sister even sketched this little artwork to go along with the itch page. I was so happy to finally be done, and then I got like 4 hours of sleep and had to go to school, but at least it was done. So what do I think about Fossils vs. Feds now? Well, it's the first game I've ever made that actually has what can be called an ending, and I'm super proud of that alone. I learned a lot in the process of making it, especially on making cutscenes and such, as I'd never done that before, and that's great because I really only joined the game jam to get more experience. The game jam had cash prizes, but I fully accept to not even place anything near the top. There were a ton of good games submitted, and mine only got 1 comment, but it was a positive one at least, so that made me happy. Unfortunately, there's a couple of bugs that I wish I had squashed before it was too late. Mainly, you can start the level before the dialogue is finished by pressing the spacebar, which was a debug feature I forgot to get rid of, and then you instantly lose because you have no units. And sometimes your creatures can go flying over buildings, particularly in certain levels, because of the botched way I implemented collisions late into development. I made the mistake of forgetting about the existence of walls when I was first making the movement code, when I should have been future-proofing the code to include collisions the entire time, but oh well. I will say though, my favorite bug has to be this one where you can place units at the edge of a wall and they'll all squish together. When you start the battle, they shoot out super fast, which actually works to your benefit, I think. Did I call this a bug? Actually, it's an intended strategic feature disguised as an Easter egg for the player to find. Yeah, definitely. The final thing I will say is that I regret some of the decisions for the controls. Using right click to drag ended up being pretty unintuitive for a lot of people I tested the game on, and above all, it makes the game not mobile friendly. The game is actually pretty fun to play on your phone, and everything else is able to be done except drag around the screen, which is kind of important. So in hindsight, I should have made some other way to do it without having to use right click. Although it is a pretty fun challenge to play on your phone without being able to move the screen, and I still made it pretty far into the game with that limitation. Overall, I had a blast making this game, and I hope you all enjoy playing it. Plus, I ended up doing good on all my finals, even while having to juggle them with the game jam, which I'm quite pleased about. Hooray! I'll put the link to the game in the description, and it plays in your browser on literally every device. It takes only around 20 minutes to complete, so I'd really appreciate it if you guys can check it out. That's all for me for today. Now it's time to get to work on the next game jam I signed up for. In the meantime, I'm just gonna hope that the federal government doesn't see my game as some sort of threat to democracy. But I'm sure it'll be... Oh no, did they find me?